You know the tech you see in the movies, like the holograms in Guardians of the Galaxy, the mission control data in The Martian, or the analog but not controls in Dune? David Sheldon-Hicks and his team at Territory Studio built those. They specialize in building near-future interfaces, and they do it on film and in the real world, like in cars from Audi, Corvette, and Cadillac.
We're somewhere between Hollywood and Silicon Valley, so it's fantastical meets real life.
Territory lives in the near future, so I was interested to have David, their CEO and founder and the leader of their film work, and Perry Mason, who leads their real-world digital product studio, on the show to ask them how they figure out what comes next and where we're headed. David said something that I'm still turning over in my head. He said the future will be more Dune than Marvel. Marvel is maximalist, with screens everywhere, data shouting for your attention. Dune is more analog and tactile, but with highly advanced technology sitting underneath, available to be summoned when needed. David calls this quiet tech and says it's what we need right now.
I think we all crave more humanity, more tactility, more contact with the real world. And AI done in the right way can be agentic behind the scenes and be this kind of laid intelligence that sits underneath everything, but doesn't need to shout for your attention.
Many of the films Territory works on are dystopian visions of the future or cautionary tales. And David says exploring the dark is very valuable for seeing the light.
Investigate where those fears are coming from. Why are we so worried about ending up in that place?
Welcome to Future Around and Find Out. I'm Dan Blumberg, and here we grapple with emerging tech and try to steer the future in the right direction. Learn more and sign up for the show's newsletter at futurearound.com. What does it take to build one of these worlds or these digital displays that appear in movies and do it in a way that feels like it could be real? I'm curious how you know how far to go and when you maybe have gone, too far, or how you calibrate.
Yeah. I mean, you normally get gist from the script very early on. So with something like Guardians of the Galaxy, or maybe even Ready Player One, it's very fantastical, right? And you want people to lose themselves in that entertainment world. So I think if you started taking yourself too seriously in that, people would get hung up on the details and you'd take them out. So you need to play into the entertainment language. And especially with things like with Guardians of the Galaxy, you've got a walking, talking tree and a robotic raccoon. So there's no logic for how I build an interface out for that. And so you need to have fun and be really quite expressive with the data that goes on screens to just add to that overall texture. And so we'll be working, James Gunn on the first one, he did a brilliant thing, which was he wrote in the soundtrack into the script. So we had an immediate gist of the soul of the film. We kind of could understand by the very, Jackson 5 at the end and the Pina Colada song and all that kind of stuff. It's like, okay, this movie, firstly, is not taking itself seriously. It's having a lot of fun with it. It's got a lot of spirit. It's definitely referencing a lot of 1980s vibes. So we can have a lot of fun with that. And we can become quite expressive in the technology and the digital space that we inhabit. Holograms, computer screens, technology, all that sort of thing. And it needed to feel vivid. It needed to feel part of the Marvel universe. So there's some rules already kind of in place. We're not going completely crazy. We went pretty crazy, but not fully out there. So we're sticking in the Marvel universe. We knew that we needed to be an expression of the personality of the movie. We knew that we were going to need to functionally deliver screens for the Milano, for the Nova Prison, for various different worlds. So we had a sense of what each world meant, functionally what each world needed to do. So on the Milano, it's going to be navigation and avionics and all that sort of thing. So some basic technology rules in terms of vernacular, but then you can play a lot within that space. Contrast that to a movie like The Martian or Ad Astra or Ex Machina even. On Ex Machina, Alex Garland really pushed us to understand what code format might look like in a world where we're programming for AI. And so I think we even took on a code consultant to kind of just give us some of the basic syntax that might be seen on screens. And a lot of that movie really for us was surveillance. It's creating this level of observation going on. And Ava is behind a glass wall for a lot of the movie, being observed, but she's observing them. And, that whole kind of mirroring playing out. So a lot of the time you're using technology as a metaphor for something else or a subtext within the movie that becomes really interesting. And that definitely happened on Ex Machina. The Martian was a really successful partnership because Scott was the director, Arthur Max was the production designer, and Felicity Hickson was the kind of lead graphic designer. And they all really encouraged us to have a conversation with NASA. So I think historically, if you saw NASA depicted in a movie, a lot of the design teams would kind of ad hoc the data and kind of be an interpretation of what NASA could be in the future. We were put in contact with Dave Lavery at Jet Propulsion Labs, and he spent a lot of time with us just helping us understand what the different roles at NASA do, how they look at the data, how they work with the data, the types of data that would be on screen. I think he even figured out the calculation to, there was this idea that we're going to slingshot around the Earth and go back to Mars to go back and get Matt Damon's character, Mark Watney. And Dave kind of gave us the calculations for that. So there was a real desire from NASA involvement in the movie just to give us all the data to help us understand what we're designing for, and this to be near future and as authentic as we possibly could be. And so you've kind of got different ends of the spectrum. Sometimes we're very, very real world. So working with Catherine Bigelow on 0.30, where it's kind of be as authentic as you can be without giving away national secrets. The Martian being a little bit more in from that, where it's near future. There's a bit of a hypothesis going on. It still needs to feel like a Ridley Scott movie, so it needs to look beautiful, but can the data be as authentic as possible? And then you go out to things like Ready Player One, which is far more textural, but also kind of taking on cultural cues. So Stephen was really interested in Ready Player One being more of a commentary on social media now. Like, we all have these digital personas. How do those digital personas come through in our digital expression and our digital persona online? And so, yes, it was based in a VR reality, but actually he was saying more about social media than he was than VR and where it might be going. And yeah, our digital lives in general. So it becomes a cultural statement, and it becomes a lot about human character again. So sometimes we're very emotive with it, and sometimes we sit far closer to reality. And both of those places are really, really interesting and fun to be working in.
Yeah, it sounds like it. You said something in the last time we spoke that the future, the real world, may be closer to Dune, which you've also worked on, than Marvel. And I didn't ask what you meant by that. Was that a prediction, a cautionary tale? What did you mean by that?
No, I don't think so. I think for me, Dune's really interesting because they're a post-AI society. Like, there's been a reset on technology. When we're working in the Marvel universe, it's maximalist. There's a lot of transparent screens. There's a lot of detail. There's a lot of data. The visual language is very complex. And where I'm seeing AI taking us is actually how do we simplify and make the data that we see come through really relevant. And I wouldn't say that's dystopian, actually. I think that's good. That's the direction we want to be headed in. And so the Marvel universe is very expressive, and I love it. And it's not a criticism, but I think where we were going with Dune and that universe is actually, as we move towards AI, we just understand how much we love the tactile world and how we love the physical environment around us. And if we can have quiet tech, so intelligence that just sits behind the surface and we kind of only conjure it up when we need it, I think that's where we're all headed. I think we all crave more humanity, more tactility, more kind of contact with the real world. And AI done in the right way can be agentic and behind the scenes and be this kind of layered intelligence that sits underneath everything, but doesn't need to shout for your attention. I think as humans, we're all starting to understand, okay, we've had a lot of shouting for our attention now. Actually, what I need is less of that. I want to quiet my life down and just focus on the things that are really important to me. And I think some of the technology that we were playing around with in the Dune films kind of beds into that, which is it looks and appears analog in first instance, but actually sitting behind that is kind of deep, intelligent tech behind it all that kind of instinctually knows what you're trying to achieve.
I love that phrase, quiet tech.
That topic is very apparent in automotive industry, for example, where at one extreme there has to be a bit of shouting about a new technology or something that happens in a car to sell it ultimately. But I'd say the desire, what makes you want and love a car, a lot of it is around CMF, like the color, material, finish, the textures, and the quiet time you have in a car, right? Those are all things that you actually want from your car, as well as all the practical stuff. But the things that make it valuable and special, a lot of it is about what it feels like, and the clunk of the door opening or closing and all of those things. And I think AI, is having its moment where we're all talking about it, but it's going to start sort of falling back into the background. And yeah, if my car is smart and it means I don't crash into anything and it can drive me somewhere, that's great. But I want it to be comfortable, and maybe not having neon lights all around it on the inside, like making it a special place, feels very relevant in the auto industry at the minute, in certain places.
You sort of live in the near future. So I'd love to ask, what is your process for extrapolating from here to what comes next?
When we're talking about what the future looks like, we have to work with clients to establish how they see the world and where they want it to go. We can't take it too far where it's just completely not believable. There has to be some element of truth to everything. We want to push our ideas as far as we can forward, but ultimately we have to also get them step by step in that direction over the course of time. That's getting harder. We used to work 5 years out plus, I'd say, and more in the realms of what if, whereas now most things we come up with will happen. Like, that's what it feels like.
What's the part that's getting harder?
It's getting harder to, I guess, come up with things that aren't going to happen. A lot of the films we've worked on, Ex Machina, humanoid robotics, and flying car, we're working with a flying car company, right? So, and I guess this is why we're good at what we do, is that we kind of influence the places that entrepreneurs and tech people making innovations, where they want to go. It kind of feels like they're influenced by what they see in films. And that's not a new thing. But I guess what's happening quicker is the ability to make those things happen.
I think the other interesting standpoint that we touch on, especially with filmmakers, is that they're almost never looking at a utopian view of things. Like they're really interested in the dystopian, because you get a dramatic tension as soon as you look at the dystopian. There's a film that we didn't work on that I'm thinking about a lot at the moment, which is Idiocracy. I don't know if you're familiar with that film, Dan.
Yeah. Living it.
Yeah, yeah. And you kind of think about how much technology can do for us now, and you think, well, are we consciously taking ourselves in the right direction that we're all happy with? Or are we just responding to this because of consumerism? And maybe have we backed ourselves into a corner? And I think a lot of those interesting dystopian films, like Blade Runner 2049, even Ex Machina, it's kind of stipulating, well, we're on our trajectory to this. Now, is that actually where we want to go? Are we being intentional enough that we're answering more than just a consumer need for immediate gratification? And I don't know if we ask ourselves that enough at the moment, truly questioning the direction that we're headed in. So I love that we get to play, especially on the fantastical side and the dystopian. I remember when we were working with the director on Guardians of the Galaxy, he gave us the brief of, for Ronan's spaceship, he had the idea of interfaces that were controlled, but they needed to feel like they were in pain. So the interface that they were controlling with their hands, it was an orb-like structure. As you're controlling it with your hands, it would do that in complete conflict, and it wouldn't enjoy the whole process of being interacted with. And those kind of emotional kind of levers that we get in movies, those world-building, textural types of briefs, are not what we see in the real world. Obviously, I don't think a tech company would come to us and say, I want this interface to feel malevolent. But it's a great exercise for our creators to go down. And it's that early workshopping around ideas, getting all the bad ideas out of your system before you hit upon some truly interesting ones. And I think in us going through that thinking exercise of this will lead us down a really interesting dystopian future, from that you start to get some interesting answers around, well, where should we be headed? And I find it's useful for brands to kind of explore it in that way. So moving away from, well, what does this mean in terms of our next generation of technology, and where do we want to push consumers, more around how bad could this get? Explore that as a series of ideas to really get to something that could be interesting and relevant to everyone.
That's really interesting. So don't avoid dystopia or dystopian conversations, like embrace them. That's why some of these films do so well, right? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, investigate them. Investigate where those fears are coming from. Why are we so worried about ending up in that place? Or, is dumb consumerism something that we should push back on? And actually, is there a way of having respect for the audience that you're designing for or creating for that's a little bit more than dumbing down? Somebody said to me, I don't think I came up with this. Somebody said to me that one of the best interfaces ever or pieces of technology is a musical instrument, because it really asks the user to invest a lot in it to learn it and master it. And if you think about that in UX terms, what you're saying is put a load of friction in place, make it really hard to use that interface. You wouldn't do that normally. You wouldn't make something incredibly hard to master. But actually, you create real devotees, and you create master craftspeople that they build their entire career around mastering that one piece of technology or that one interface, and they make beautiful things. So I think sometimes the desire to create simplicity and make things simple isn't always the way that we should go. And so we should kind of explore those human characteristics more fully before we kind of go to the obvious, simple, easy answer within some of these technologies that we build out.
Yeah. How does that relate? I mean, you're making me think of AI, which is, huge friction reducer in many cases. It'll write things for you. It'll create things for you. Like how does that relate to what we are or maybe ought to be building, with these new tools?
The interesting thing about AI is it's not very critical. So what I love about working with my teams is they constantly tell me how wrong I am. And I find that AI, particularly when we're in conversation with it, is very agreeable. It'll immediately agree with your pushback. And so I think it ends up giving you the answers that you want to hear rather than the ones that you need to hear. So I think that kind of the critical thinking is often missing from a conversation with AI. And so I don't think we will ever get to a place where it will know where to push back in the right way. Maybe there's a way of programming it in a way that does challenge us more. And maybe there's a version of that can come out in the world. I thought Perplexity was an interesting model, very conversational, very loose. But I think there's more that we can look at to challenge us, because I think that's where the best ideas come from. And I think an AI that just gives us the answers that we want to hear isn't necessarily useful in the world.
I was talking to our ECD the other day about the creative process you go through. It has to be painful. It has to be like learning an instrument. You have to go through everything to fully think it through and to come up with something novel and new. And yeah, you can prompt an AI to give you a bunch of suggestions. I mean, we've been working with AI for a long time now, and from the beginning, we were like, okay, well, this is just going to regurgitate things that have already been thought of and done. So for us, it's the classic kind of think different approach. But yeah, we quite often look at the worst ideas first. And to David's point as well, on the work we do with tech companies, where we're looking at products which could lead to a dystopian future, there's a responsibility there as well. So we have to play everything out to make sure that we're not going to be sort of adding to the misery of the future.
What are some specific examples of that future that you want to avoid, that you're getting on the edges of?
So, I mean, robotics is an easy one, but I think going back 5 or 6 years now, one of the first projects I worked on at Territory was for Toyota, and it was essentially a platform which was pooling all the sensor information from a car. Essentially, any connected car that had cameras, LiDAR, radar, GPS, essentially could build a 3D view of the world around it at any time. And once you apply that to millions of cars, you're essentially building a 3D live view of planet Earth. And so, we started looking at how AI recognizes things, how it pulls information together, how to display it, how to make sure that you can cross-check for accuracy. But alongside that, we're thinking, okay, we're working on a Bond film at the same time, and that's literally the baddie in that film. So how do we make sure that this is going to be used in a positive, and ultimately, we can't be in control of all those things and market forces necessarily, but it makes you question how to make sure it doesn't, for a start, look like it's a terrible thing. Then how does it not behave like a terrible thing? And ultimately, how do you make it into a service which helps? This is for training autonomous vehicles in the future. So ultimately, it's something that probably is behind the scenes that no one's ever going to see. but a bunch of developers and mapping experts and things are going to be using this. And you want to make sure, yeah, it's frictionless. But like working on that project is like, okay, AI can do this now? Okay. And so this was a long time ago. Imagine what that's doing now.
Right. David, you said there's some questions that we're not asking enough. I'm curious what some more of those are from your perspective.
So much of the technology and the experiences that we're building need to speak to as many people as possible. And I think when brands and technology solutions look to achieve that, they try and go as generic as possible. They try and go as universal as possible with their language. And so we end up with 10 different versions that all look the same, all feel the same, don't really have a different point of view. And I don't really know if that is where everybody wants to end up. So the thing that I love looking at is how do we create commercial differences for different brands and different technology partners? And that is by being distinct. That is by having a confidence in your own voice. And I love referencing many years ago work Christopher Nolan. And one of the things about working with him is that he isn't afraid to make things grandiose, make them big, have a point of view, and assume that the audience can keep up. I think when I watched Inception for the first time at a cinema, I was like, oh my God, I can't blink. I need to spend all of my brain power just kind of keeping up with all the narrative layering that was going on here, as well as truly figuring out what the twist at the end truly meant. Don't ask me for my answer on that because it's not fair. So I love that you can be appealing to a mass audience but not go for the common denominator or not go for the obvious answer. I love that as a benchmark. Now, it's incredibly tough on the teams executing against that to have that benchmark of we want to speak and be as universally appealing as possible, but we want to have a unique and truly new view of the world and provoke thinking, make it that much harder for somebody to keep up because we don't assume that they can't keep up. We assume that everyone's intelligent and we assume the best of people. So I think that confidence around doing something truly different, I think it's a wonderful thing. And I think helping tech brands do that and have their own positioning, their own tone of voice, their own way in the world, I think is something we all crave, actually. I don't think we do all just want 10 different versions of the same phone or 10 different versions of, the same TV. I think there is a place in the world for uniqueness and we are tribe-like, we do have, our individual territories and we do feel like we belong in different camps. And I think it's okay to sit with that. And that doesn't mean to diminish your overall appeal to a mass market. I think it's just about having a point of view and sitting within that. And that comes down to asking the right questions, not answering the same question that everyone else is answering, but finding your own challenge in the world that is unique to you. And that's where category creation comes from. And that's where you start building out unique solutions that aren't iterative on something done before.
Is there a favorite example that comes to mind?
I mean, there's so many out in the world. There's so many classic design moments. There's so many innovative technology moments. I mean, for me, my moment of shift was just seeing the internet turn up. Like I just remember that vividly and seeing the first JPEG kind of slowly download on my computer screen. And my kids won't listen to me. They're like, what are you talking about? Dial-up modems? I don't understand. I don't understand that moment. But for me, the shift from programming everything locally, doing the graphics locally, and then you'd save that to a disk or a tape, and you would have to copy that to share that with friends. And then going from, well, now suddenly I can share everything and it can go out to the world. And I might not have met these people. That as a kind of democratization of a moment was just incredible. And everything that followed that. I do think that AI is that same moment. Because we're sitting in it, I think we struggle to understand how big an impact it is on culturally how we operate as human beings. And I'm struggling to see outside of that. Yeah. And I look at films like Blade Runner and Ex Machina and think, well, maybe.
Yeah. Well, let's struggle with that a little bit. I mean, what you said, it's hard to project even 5 years. Perry, you said this, but it's hard to project even 5 years out. Like, What are you paying most attention to? What do you think is possible in the next couple of years, either on the exciting side or on the, dystopian side that we want to not go towards?
Well, just touching on I guess the reason that it's getting hard to predict, we're on this exponential curve of technology. And yeah, we did a project, say 3 years ago around the subject of AI and interviewing very senior engineers, developers in a massive tech company. And the problem they had is they can't even imagine what they'll be doing in 6 months' time, right? So if you're making products or software and you can't know what shape your team's going to be or how much of which department you might be using, that gets quite tricky. Also, when big tech companies, when you've got lots of different departments doing that, then actually trying to bring all those things together is kind of where we come in creatively to try and push a little bit further ahead. But even then, we worked on amalgamating all this knowledge, pushing it 2 or 3 years ahead. But even then, some of that stuff happened in 6 months because just the pace of it is crazy. I think where we're looking, I guess the next big leaps, and space is a big one. There's a lot of investment and excitement and movement in what's happening in space, from tourism and investment data centers, all those kind of things. There's a big push there. Humanoid robotics, I guess, where they're going to be functioning. So moving from, robotic arms in factories to humanoid robotics in factories, to being in the home. Like, what impact is that going to have? And ultimately, David and I spoke the other day, with all of these things, with AI, with robotics in automotive, we're seeing so many of the applications be used to save money or make investors money. There's going to be this gap, I think, between who can go to space, who can afford to have a humanoid robot. The geopolitical sort of landscape and all those things have had a much bigger impact, I'd say, on, I guess, where we think things might go.
The K-shaped economy.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, coming through all different sort of creative industries over my life, now it seems there's loads more to keep on top of rather than just application of creative in industry. It's like, okay, well, if they do that and they do that, where do all these things tie together? A lot more bad ideas come out before the good ones.
Right.
Yeah, there's a TV series that we worked on just a few years ago. I mean, definitely space and robotics are fascinating, but I think it's some of the things I didn't necessarily think about AI being used for, but it just gets me really excited once you hear it out loud. So they toyed with the idea that because AI is so good at pattern recognition and it's already translating multiple languages and all that kind of stuff, is there the potential that you could be able to start to talk to animals? Could you have a conversation with a whale using AI translation? Well, you start to think about that as an idea.
And should we? Yeah.
Well, we should, because then we need to be ethically responsible.
Right.
Now, would that heighten our empathy for what we're doing to the planet? I mean, maybe the technology will be varied for exactly that reason. I don't know. But I love the idea that we could... I mean, I don't know what sort of conversation I'd have with my Dachshund. I think that would be
So weirdly, David, I got an email about this yesterday. There is a startup.
You got an email from my Dachshund?
No, maybe. There was a startup working on it. They reckon they've got it to 95% accuracy. They've used it on 10,000 animals. And I was like, I showed it to my kids yesterday. I was like, wow, this is literally it's a collar from Up. It's you put on your dog and it can figure out its mood and what it's trying to say. And I was like, oh wow, yeah, this is happening.
Yeah, I just find it immensely fascinating that as human beings, our first use for AI has been thought leadership pieces on social media. And somebody somewhere, I hope, is trying to cure cancer and bioengineering and saving the planet and all the things that we were promised it was going to do. Because, like I say, it goes back to the interesting questions. Like, rather than doing endless image creation and video creation, surely there's some more scientific applications for this that truly move the needle and move us on. And I do think communication with nature would be a really interesting one. The pattern recognition that's in this new technology is phenomenal. And sometimes it does feel like magic, and I think we have to be wary of that. I mean, I am not keeping up with the latest in the development of AGI, and depending on who you listen to and who you trust, you'll get very different inputs on that. But I do think, again, it just goes to those, like, what are the interesting questions? And so for me, robotics, absolutely. I can definitely see where sending a robot into a dangerous situation to, accomplish something would make complete sense. But then equally, I think it's the things that we're not doing currently that we could be doing with it that I think we need to explore more.
Yeah. On the topic of robotics, I'm curious for your perspective on humanoid robots. You've worked on a number of films where they appear. And Perry, where you and I first met at Web Summit, there were some walking around the conference floor. I kind of question whether we need robots to look like us and, walk like us. But I'm curious what applications you see where that form, specifically humanoids, is really useful and likely to be adopted.
Yeah, I think obviously it's evolved from, the world around us is built for human shaped things. So it kind of makes sense that you can quite quickly put something in. It's like an adapter, right? It fits into everything that already exists. So we kind of record these thought experiments and put them into articles, a bit like Dave was saying, but not with AI. And one of the ones we talked about in my team was about humanoid robots and why are they that shape? Why aren't they on wheels? All of those things. I think, like, knowing where that'll end up, I'm not sure. We've seen some big displays of, I guess, technical prowess around the world with dancing and kung fu and all sorts of things. And then some terrifying giant robots and, Transformer style things. I don't know where that'll end up, but from our side, it's what happens when there is a robot in your space. Like, how does it behave? How does it, should it act human or should it not?
Right.
Should it be a butler, a servant? Like, what role does it have in our environment? And, some of the things we were thinking about, if it is human shaped, then surely it can drive a car. Why do we need to work on autonomous vehicles if a robot can drive a car? Or can it walk a dog? All of those things start to become questions. So I don't know if there's a better form factor for it. Yeah, I think either way, it's going to need to find its place, and people are going to, I guess, struggle to kind of get used to it to begin with. But how it behaves is going to be a big part of that.
If you fast forward, pick the number of years you want to fast forward, but like, what do you see in terms of how we will live, with robots, or who will live with robots, or what they'll be doing? Do you have a sense of what you think might be coming or is possible?
I think it will depend a lot on price point and what they're able to do. Again, as a sort of thought experiment, if a humanoid robot, you could have the same price as a used car, but it could, do your cleaning, your tidying, your gardening. Like, how many hours does that buy you back? How does that compare to using human labor? Do you feel safe around it? Do you ever see it? Does it work in the night? Like, it doesn't need to be visible even. We kind of use this phrase like the cleaning fairy. If the cleaning fairy turns up every night and you don't see it, like, maybe that's quite incredible. I think it'll be a question of price point and how much you can trust it ultimately.
I mean, this is starting to go down the dystopian future for me.
Yeah.
Because if we've got robots taking care of physical tasks and AI taking care of mental ones, like, what is there left for us in terms of
musical instruments?
I mean, yeah, but presumably they can play a musical instrument
really well.
as well. So I kind of go to, what is the future that we want? Do we still want a sense of purpose? If capitalism backs itself into a corner, which ultimately says, okay, we need to make companies as profitable as possible, so therefore we reduce the amount of human capital within a company to as little as possible and go all out robots, then we no longer have consumers. And if we don't have consumers, the whole system just breaks down and falls apart. And I suspect if we went to all of these tech platforms and said, okay, you're going to finance universal basic income, like, not without being forced. And I just don't know how we kind of get there. So there's going to be a reckoning somewhere along the lines on all of this stuff where you kind of go, is this actually what we wanted?
Yeah.
And I don't feel like anybody's saying that strongly enough at the moment. But the reason I get out of bed is I love making stuff. I love building things. That can be like through great ideas. It can be a physical thing. It can be a digital thing. I love telling stories. I love all of that. And I love originating things. And at the moment, we recognize that AI is great at looking at historical data, but originating things, it's not there. So many people in conversation on this subject at the moment say, not there yet. And, that becomes a concern. It's just like, what's going to be left? And I haven't heard a confident answer around that, which is when I go back to the idiocracy kind of reference point, because it's kind of what's left. And so again, the thing that is kind of constantly in my mind is, are we tracking ahead to something that we don't really want? Therefore, we need an alternative and what that could look like. But I find physical robots absolutely fascinating. I think, living in the UK, we don't have very practical homes. A lot of us have homes that were built in the 1900s earlier, and they're a bit disjointed. They're all on different levels. They've got stairs, some rooms not necessarily on the same level as other rooms or on the same floor. It's all a bit higgledy-piggledy. And so you couldn't see an R2-D2 getting around a property like that. But you could see like a humanoid robot being able to walk around that and navigating it, and you can see the need. And I like Perry's point about, could you just have a robot in a car driving it rather than... But again, that goes to, Perry, the work that we did with Audi and others has been, yes, you can have autonomous driving, and yes, it can take itself off to get charged. But if you like driving, press the button, switch to manual, and take the steering wheel, and you can take over. And so there's that choice there. And maybe that will be it. Maybe it will be a case of we can choose when we want to invest our time and our effort into something. We can pick our moments that we feel as though human touch is really important. So for me, I can see that physical environment and personal connection and network still becomes a very human thing. I think live performance, so sport and music and things like that, where the kind of the shared combined experience amongst an audience becomes really important. I think that will still be okay. But it feels like the world around us is shrinking quite quickly. And I just don't know how that's all going to shape up and play out.
Yeah. And you just made me think of another thing, actually, which was, I guess, how I'm using AI most at the moment is solving problems, or it's either getting a thought out of my head and getting it sat somewhere so that it can kind of be thought about more, so like a sparring partner, or it's to learn something. And actually, if you think of a humanoid robot as it has the ability to teach you anything, then actually that's quite exciting, right? So yeah, you can learn the instrument, but you've got a tutor there that can tell you if you're holding it right, and that can be with you in any room, and all of those things. I had some Ray-Ban Meta glasses the other day, and we had an electrician in that had wired a light switch upside down. And I was like, oh, I need to get him back. And I was like, I'm going to give it a go, put the glasses on, and it told me which wire was in the wrong place. And I was like, oh, I've just used AI to solve a physical problem in the real world. I think I'm becoming an android.
This is why you sit on the utopian side of the equation, Perry, because I would have electrocuted myself.
At least I would have recorded it.
What do you think of the stories that Silicon Valley is telling right now? Like, do you think that they are? I mean, I think you're implying like there's not enough of a compelling version of the future that's being put out. We're recording this just after a lot of graduation ceremonies in the U.S. People were booing speakers who mentioned AI. The Pope is even weighing in on AI and saying, is this the future that we want? Like, how can builders do a better job of steering us towards the future that we want?
So I think there's an awful lot of nonsense out there. I think people are protecting their share price. They're protecting investor sentiment, and they're talking things up and fear-mongering, really. The economy is down, and it's not because of AI. It's just that we've been through a pandemic. Interest rates are where they're at, and consumer spending is less strong. Now, I suspect in the US that's been completely overshadowed by the growth in AI, which is great. It's great that there's that forward momentum, but I do wonder whether the kind of the more realistic picture that is being seen in the UK and Europe is maybe to come in the US. I don't know. I'm not an economist, but if looking at the narrative, especially coming through from kind of the influencer economy, there's so much talking things up without any foundational knowledge. And we see this when we see AI being applied to the Hollywood industry, just talking about, oh, well, now we can do a $100 million film for $10, whatever the crazy factoid is. And it just shows a complete lack of understanding around how movies are made and why it's so important to make hundreds of millions of decisions along the way to make something truly great. And the same thing goes for a car or anything anything of real value is really hard to do. Because if it was really easy to do, it wouldn't be very valuable. So if you're trying to create value, you need to make it really, really hard to achieve. And so as soon as we introduce things that make things easier, the value disappears. It does become more democratized. And I talk about this a lot, the idea that, well, suddenly we can all make movies, they're less valuable. Well, that's not actually true. We've had phones in our pockets for 10, 15 years that you could shoot a movie on. Blair Witch Project was shot on high-8 cameras and all that kind of stuff. The technology is not the barrier to making stories that people are willing to pay and go and see. It's great ideas, it's great storytelling, it's the hard work that goes in that gives you something that you hadn't seen before. And the reason you hadn't seen it before was because either somebody hadn't got to that story yet, or it was really, really hard to pull off. You know, if I think about the Avatar movies, they're like just absolutely insanely hard to make those movies. So I think there's a lot of overpromise going on. And I understand what drives that. I understand that there's, you know, people's businesses and investment going on behind it. But it becomes extreme fear-mongering for the people that are still working in those spaces. And I really struggle with that. I don't think it's to the benefit of many, but the benefit to a few. So for me, you have to be really careful with over-promising and over-hyping something, which is definitely the noise that's being felt from me at the moment.
Yeah, you keep seeing things like, you know, someone shares some AI-made video like Hollywood is cooked. I imagine you have a particular reaction when you...
That's my entire feed. That's my entire doom scrolling. It's like, why does it keep serving me this stuff? Is it trying to make me upset?
Yeah. I'll bring us home here. You mentioned you worked on The Martian. How far away is that future?
Well, so I'm chatting with Thomas from NASA next week at South by Southwest, and I'm going to ask him that question.
Okay.
I don't know if he has the answer. What's interesting about NASA is the time horizons that they work with, and I think it's the same with SpaceX. We do a lot of work with a company called VAST who are doing the next space station, and it's phenomenal to me, like how far they can look out with some confidence around the technologies. My guess would be 10 years in terms of us realistically heading to Mars. You know, that would be my complete guess. Now, I'm sure there's actual scientists out there that will completely shoot that down and say it's 30 years. I just think that there's a bit of an explosion at the moment in terms of innovation, technology and engineering in the aerospace domain more broadly, which is just exciting to watch. And we help in tiny ways within that industry, and we love being a part of it. But I'm the same as a lot of people. I think that us being interplanetary is a really exciting thing to look at. I think that, it just leads to discovery and expands our horizons, expands our thinking. And I think it is justified. And if we can do it in a way that doesn't destroy our planet in the process, if we can get up there and out and do it in a way that is still okay for the planet, then I really think it's worth striving for. And it does push us, and I think those big questions, those hard to do things are absolutely worth doing. That's kind of what I've always been up for in the work that I do. Is I love being challenged. I love doing something that, is hard to do because it's exciting to do those new things. I think as humans, we're wired to be excited by that. So yeah, my guess is heading there in 10 years time, but who knows if I'm right.
Right on. That's a great, inspiring note to end on. David, Perry, thank you so much.
Cheers, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
This is Future Around and Find Out, and I am so excited to keep exploring with you, to keep steering the future in the right direction. Go to futurearound.com to get the newsletter, to ask questions of upcoming guests, and to find more ways that we can build a better future together.